Are we in for more yen bull disappointment?
You know, I think we are in for more disappointment. And to be honest, if you listen very carefully to what the Bank of Japan is saying, then I think you probably wouldn't have got carried away with this trade last week anyway. You know, the Bank of Japan have made very, very clear, Ueda was talking about this just a month or so ago, and saying, you know what, they would rather inflation overshoot, because inflation were to overshoot, well, then they can hike interest rates, which is actually would be a really nice scenario for them. And the danger is, if they go too quickly on removing their policy accommodation, they could just be back where they've been for decades of, you know, the disinflation, deflation. They don't want to do that. They want to be very, very slow. And again, what they're waiting for is, of course, this more news on this virtuous cycle, which is domestically driven inflation coming from wage hikes, which go into consumption, which then goes into profitability, and then it becomes this cycle. So that's what they're waiting for. We had good indications this year that there is life in that cycle. They are beginning to see that, but they want to wait for more. So the process of removing that accommodation is going to be slow.
So, I mean, Bloomberg Economics have popped out their numbers as well. Core inflation will be 3% this year, drops to 1.8% in 2024. Again, missing the target. And then in 2025, I mean, who the heck knows where any of us are going to be in 2025? 0.9%. As you know, I mean, sometimes you really sort of feel like going like that with the outlooks. But here's the question from an FX perspective. If it is going to be more glacial, a move than we think, then does yen still remain a funding currency of choice? And in that case, what is it sold against, or what outperforms relative to yen?
Well, I think it will still be a funding currency. I mean, to be honest, to be long of the yen is pretty expensive. So from that point of view, yes, it will be. But of course, most other central banks, or several other the G10 central banks, you know, will be cutting interest rates in 2024. So you do have a shift in the dynamic. Now, you know, again, you mentioned sterling before. I think sterling, or the UK, the Bank of England, is going to be one of the last of the big central banks, certainly, to cut interest rates. So, you know, that might become a little bit more of an interesting trade. But I think for now, you know, even if you look at dollar yen, you know, I think we could go a little bit higher given last week's move before perhaps over the next year or so we begin to become lower again on dollar yen.